Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative Live. Marc Dann was Ohio Attorney General when he initiated a securities fraud claims against Wall Street for the mortgage crisis. He mobilized fraud task forces, recruited 1,200 volunteer lawyers to defend homeowners, and went after the biggest criminals in banking. Then he had a scandal, an extramarital affair that became headlines. He resigned in May 2008. What hangs over his story is what happens when you do the work necessary to protect citizens from big criminals. Dann didn't stop, not for 1 second. He founded Dann Law and secured a $12.9 million settlement against Wells Fargo for deliberately denying homeowners loan modifications. He won landmark Second Circuit rulings strengthening federal protections. He's prosecuted over 25 mortgage servicing class actions and helped thousands of families stay in their homes. So I'm thrilled to announce that we have Marc Dann with us today. It's great to have you here on Narrative. How are you?
Oh, I'm pleased to be here. Thank you, Zev, for the opportunity to share with your listeners.
We've been talking over the last few days about how Trump is building an apparatus to steal the 2026 elections. Everything from Heather Honey, who's this former cyber ninjas person who is now, believe it or not, running Department of Homeland Security election policy. You've got Cleta Mitchell, who is now training. She's a former insurrectionist, basically, and she's training poll workers in how to handle our voters and our votes next November. We've also got this unbelievable gerrymandering exercise in Texas, North Carolina, Indiana, Missouri. And tomorrow we have the Supreme Court hearing around Louisiana versus Calais. This is the Voters' Rights Act, which looks like Section 2 will be removed or at least severely downgraded. So, Marc, you've been a fighter for the good fight of many people over many years, and we'll get to your work around the mortgage crisis. But how serious do you view this attempt to take over the next year's elections and really gerrymander and contrive a victory for Donald Trump out of just rigging the system?
Yeah, I think it's a serious threat to democracy, to the rule of law. I mean, it's a threat that we've seen, in so many different contexts. I mean, everything from protecting consumers to the selective prosecution of crimes at a scale we've never seen before, to this mobilization, this win at all costs idea, taking over the election process, shamelessly manipulating this gerrymandering process, which apparently the U.S. Supreme Court has decided to go along with. And then, the declaration that they're going to send Justice Department observers into New Jersey and Virginia for the 2025 elections, which is also scary because these folks are not above simply contriving claims to bring, civil and criminal claims. And there are serious consequences to those things. I mean, in Ohio, our state attorney general was so excited to bring a voting fraud case that he indicted somebody who had passed away several years before.
Oh.
Without even bothering to check whether the person he was indicting was alive. So the truth doesn't seem to have any relationship to the legal efforts, the lawfare that these folks are waging, which means that we have to be, those of us who are on the side of voting rights, whoever thought that would be a side, voting rights,
right.
People on the side of the rule of law, but truly you have to self-identify now, but we have to wage our own lawfare to make sure that those rights are protected going forward.
We've seen that lawfare being quite successful in front of the courts up until now. I mean, the courts have stood by the Constitution and have put up quite a resilient front, but it's beginning to fray a little bit around the edges as some of these Trump cases are winning, at least on appeal, some victories. But as you look down at what's coming, things feel like they're going to get much worse from an authoritarian perspective. It looks like the Justice Department is clearing out anyone with any idea of independence or even following the rule of law. Just doesn't seem to be what the Department of Justice does anymore. You can imagine a world where there are so many loyalists in the DOJ and enough judges that are perhaps not as strict about following the Constitution. And you can see that this is going to winnow away over time. How urgent is this need to correct what Trump is doing and to target what Trump is doing before we get to next year's elections? Because we could face a horrendous situation.
Oh, no. And particularly in states with Democratic attorneys general, Democratic prosecutors in certain cities, they need to, and to the extent that anybody is violating somebody's constitutional right to vote, They need to step in, and if it's the federal government, they need to sue the federal government. And it's been remarkable actually how well the federal judiciary has held in light of these attacks on the rule of law, insisting on crazy things like lawyers in front of them telling the truth.
Crazy, unbelievable.
Right. Again, never thought it was something that would ever come up. But
I mean, that was stunning the other day on 60 Minutes. The whistleblower there was talking about 35 judges asking the federal government to please just be honest with them about things. It's stunning when you get to a situation like that.
Right. And federal judges feeling obligated to do their own investigations to verify what the government said. It's going to very quickly begin to undermine the ability of the federal government to charge and to prosecute any kind of crime.
Yeah.
I think that the Comey indictment is a great example of that. We're going to see whether that judge look at the issue of whether the completely inexperienced hack prosecutor was inappropriately appointed, and whether without that power that the indictment stands at all. But also looking at the fact that they are, attempting to convince grand juries to indict people without any probable cause whatsoever to believe that they committed those crimes. And the most amazing thing to me is how they and particularly Trump, but so many people that are in his orbit, they say the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing. We're going after our enemies. Hey, Pam Bondi, please, you need to go out and prosecute Adam Schiff and the Attorney General of New York and Jim Comey. And then it happens. So they're not even pretending to respect the rule of law or the presumption of innocence or due process of law.
So
they're just ignoring it.
Exactly. And that's why this promotion of Heather Honey into this position at Homeland Security is really concerning. I mean, she's talking about them establishing some sort of national emergency around voting based on the fact that Trump lost the 2020 elections, which she claims he won. Obviously, that's not true. But you've got an idea that's floating around from her and Cleta Mitchell, which seems to be what the president is going to try and do. He's going to try call a national emergency that's going to give him some sort of new powers over a state voting infrastructure and rules. Is that legal? Can he even do something like that? Is that even likely to succeed?
No, not at all. And elections are a uniquely state prerogative. Mm-hmm. And our Constitution is designed this way. And I expect not just Democratic attorneys general, but Republican attorneys general around the country to preserve that prerogative, because the tables can be turned at any given moment, whether it's the Democrats, the Republicans, or vegetarians that are in charge of the government. The last thing you want is the federal government controlling elections. And every state has its own scheme to make sure those elections are conducted fairly. In Ohio, for example, we have boards of elections in each county. Those are composed of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And they watch each other. I think it's a great system. If there's a dispute, then the Secretary of State gets a vote. So if there's a stalemate between those election holders, but who's a statewide elected official, at the end of the day, appointments to the board, the poll workers are divided equally by party. And so you've got a great system of people watching each other. We don't need the Justice Department to come in and monitor a situation like that. And, most of the folks that serve on boards of elections are actually party officials. They're Republican chairs, Democratic chairs, or former chairs, labor leaders on the Democratic side, party activists on the Republican side. They're committed to doing the right thing. So you'd have to co-opt a lot of people in a state like Ohio with the system we have.
Now, he's been putting these same conspiracy theorists are being installed across the country in states. So it's not just a federal thing. It's also a state thing. But just on that one note, there is no mechanism that actually does allow him to do that, right? I mean, he can't actually.
No, there's no federal emergency that could be declared that would allow government to take over elections. Could they move the military in? I suppose, because again, there's been very little compunction. But look, the federal judiciary is held, and there are plenty of good, honest, law-abiding elected officials around the country that simply are going to say no to that. There were some that did it in the 2020 election. There were some that did it in the 2016 election. Look at the Secretary of State, or now I guess he's now the governor of Georgia. He held the line. The Republicans I served with in the state Senate here are just as scared and disgusted and worried about this new breed of autocrat as I am, and maybe more so. because it's embarrassing to them.
Mm-hmm.
Look, they were partisan. They passed voter ID laws. They did everything they could to keep working class and poor people from being able to get to the polls to vote. But at the end of the day, the right to vote, if somebody's willing to exercise it and follow the rules, that's something that's sacrosanct. And I think that's the kind of thing that could actually, if you think the protests that are growing with the No Kings rallies are impressive, and now I think you see total rebellion on the part of the general public in the event that somebody tried to screw with their right to vote.
Yeah, it does seem to be sort of these parallel tracks all developing. You've got a economy that seems almost destined to crash somehow. It just doesn't seem like it's going to hold under the weight of all these tariffs and everything else he's introducing. You've got the militarization of our cities, which includes right now deploying ICE and the National Guard, but could include soon attempts to introduce the Marines and other military elements in cities in America operating against American citizens, which sounds unbelievable, but it might happen. And then you've got this other attempt to sort of steal everyone's vote. All of that is arriving at the same time in 2026 during an election campaign could be frightening, and it could to the protest question you're talking about. It seems to me that they're anticipating this kind of large-scale rebellion, which is why the conversation around the military in these cities has become such a big deal. Can they actually do anything to crush protests? I mean, other than the Insurrection Act, presumably that's the one thing. But what else can they do to crush protests during an election period?
Yeah, I mean, really, no, there's no inherent power that the federal government has in regard to the policing of elections. That's a uniquely state power. And look at what's happened with the takeovers of cities. Mm-hmm. The judiciary has held. Mm-hmm. They held in Los Angeles. They've held in San Francisco. They held in Chicago. They held in Portland, Oregon. I'm actually proud and impressed at the judges, some of whom were appointed by President Trump, who stood up for the rule of law and refused to allow this militarization to take hold. And my expectation is that, again, the cases need to be brought. They need to be brought up front. We've got to get these folks under oath in front of judges as quickly as possible. And that's going to come down to the elected lawyers in government at the state level, the local prosecutors, the local law directors of cities, the county folks that represent, the prosecutor represents in Ohio the boards of election. So the boards of election should be exercising their constitutional right to conduct the election the way they see fit. The state attorney general needs to go in and get preemptively, if necessary, and get orders to prohibit it. And then the lawyers that go into court and lie, we lawyers need to police ourselves. And we need to start to make sure that's already started to happen with some of the 2020 election deniers. From Rudy Giuliani down, the bar associations have taken action, and their licenses ought to be removed. And that just because you're a U.S. attorney, if you go in front of a federal judge and lie, you ought to lose your license to practice law. I mean, we take an oath, just like elected officials take an oath. And the system depends on lawyers trafficking truth, things that they actually know, not in supposition or rumor. I mean, we've had folks that have gone in front of judges and blatantly lied. And every bar association in every state needs to hold those folks accountable, because the whole thing collapses.
Right.
If you can go in front of a judge and not tell the truth.
So what about the Supreme Court then? Because the Supreme Court seems to be a very different animal than any other Supreme Court we've seen before. And that seems to be the thing that the judiciary sort of, on a federal level, yes, and on an appeals level, yes, they're holding the line. But certainly SCOTUS is a risk factor for anyone who thinks democracy, can prevail in America. How concerned are you about what SCOTUS may do, maybe not in this election, but in another election down the line, when they're the defining winner of who gets to win the presidency, the decider?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of members of the court that are just lost causes. Mm-hmm. I also have a little bit of confidence in John Roberts. I was always impressed by I was AG when he was appointed Chief Justice, and we had a chance to spend some time with him. And I believe he is an institutionalist and wants the Supreme Court to survive as an institution. Mm-hmm. There's a limit to how much of their credibility they concede. when it comes to personnel decisions and the breadth of executive power as it relates to running the federal government, I mean, that's a legitimate argument that serious lawyers can have with each other. How far does legislative power go? Where are the bounds of executive power? And I think those are the decisions where if it was in a close situation, they've landed on the side of the Trump administration. But when it comes down to usurping the states' rights to conduct their own elections, I still have to believe there's 5 of them that are going to hold on to the rule of law. The serious lawyers on that court, there's a few of them, are it's use of the shadow docket, where there's not full hearings and full briefing on issues. I think that's one way to slow the train down. I think we'll see them getting more aggressive about that. Again, they're lawyers too, and they're governed by the bar. And if you're, there's no reason why I'm a member of the DC bar. We did successfully push back the campaign of Pam Bondi's brother to become the
right. I remember that. That was a big story
of the DC bar. Yeah, I had just been admitted to DC, so it was my first bar election, and it isn't something I usually pay a lot of attention to. But I was happy to cast my ballot on that one. But they've got to hold the Supreme Court lawyers, the Supreme Court judges accountable too. They're lawyers.
Absolutely. That's a good point. I want to turn to this other thing that you've done so remarkably well, which is to stand by citizens and consumers in your career. You've been a real champion for consumer protection in your career, doing some incredible work, some of which is still floating around today because of the work that many of us have been uncovering around Jeffrey Epstein and around what seems to be, to me in any event, a growing 5-decade-long expansive criminal enterprise that has crashed the markets on repeated occasions, been there to buy the assets that are now worth a lot less at pennies on the dollar, taken advantage of all the bailouts, really harmed Americans on a daily basis in terms of what we used to believe is the American dream. I was on a show earlier on with some colleagues, and people are just decrying what they're saying is the mass engineered poverty of America. And there is so much poverty in America, and so much of it seems to have been avoidable if all these crashes and bailouts and all these things didn't happen. Now, it seems to me in my investigations that a lot of this has been engineered by a cabal of very powerful, very rich, very foreign supported individuals that have deliberately crashed this market over and over again, stealing everyone's American dream. I mean, it's nothing bigger than that. I can't imagine a bigger target than that. What can be done about this at this point? There is so much evidence that's beginning to build around it. We're seeing Senator Wyden do some incredibly interesting investigations, especially around JP Morgan, about Jamie Dimon, and about the other banks that have been involved. But this is I'm still stunned that it was around for so long and no one saw it, no one stopped it. But nevertheless, it is now the reality. What can be done?
Well, the most recent kind of blatant example of this was when they built the Democrats who were in charge. It was Obama was the president at the time. And look, the people that support Trump aren't necessarily wrong about the fact that elected officials of both parties have been in the tank with big business and cheating businesses at the expense of ethical businesses. People forget about when they say, well, there's too much consumer protection or the CFPB is too aggressive. If there isn't strong regulation of business in this country, then the businesses that cheat are going to have an advantage. And in fact, their shareholders are going to demand that they cheat, or they're going to get, or those office holders or those directors and officers are going to get thrown out of the companies. And so when you don't have an FTC that enforces antitrust law, when you don't have a Justice Department enforcing antitrust law, when you literally functionally shut the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau down, you are empowering cheaters. Look, Donald Trump, his entire life has been a grift. He is proud. He proudly represents the grifters and the folks that want to cheat their way to a fortune. Yeah, I think the country. Look, what I found certainly with my clients is that they're smart. They were onto it. That in 2008, the Obama administration created solutions that primarily benefited the banks and the Wall Street investors at their expense. And they punished them by electing Donald Trump in 2016. But the Democrats apparently learned nothing from that. They've continued to worry about what the needs of these massive corporations and billionaires are at the expense of the folks that have historically voted for Democrats. So we don't have a party right now of the working class in this country. And so what's left is we have to try to access the rule of law directly through private rights of action, through bringing cases. We have to rely on state attorneys general to step in and raise these issues. The Bush administration set out to preempt all kinds of state regulation of business very successfully. The Obama administration just refused to do the administration shift. They refused to do the strict and reasonable enforcement of consumer protection laws. And then Congress reacted. They created the CFPB, and it creates such a risk to payday lenders and to other predators. I mean, it's just like, I was joking the other day, they're just going to run out of poor people to exploit. I mean, I think that may be the end of the market there.
Well, maybe the end of America there. Yeah. The thing is, there's so much money being taken out, and especially with this next crypto venture, it's going to be even worse. But the point you're making is about, there was somewhere along the line, there was a fusion between Wall Street and the Treasury Department. Yeah. And it became the acceptable thing, or the expected thing, that the Treasury Secretary was going to come out of Wall Street, was going to be a Goldman Sachs executive or an executive of another big firm, and that they were going to decide what's best for America based on what would they do? They would obviously decide for Wall Street because that's where their money comes from. And so we've lost our independent treasury really along the way. It's become beholden to Wall Street. And for whatever reason, whether it was Obama or Biden or anybody, this is where they've gone to. And along with Citizens United and various other things, we've lost our democracy and control over our own treasury. We need to sort of separate that, right? I mean, we need to control. The American people need to control their own treasury, and that means electing people who are going to appoint independent people to run that.
And you could see the bailout as it was structured in 2009. It literally held everybody who cheated during the 2008 run-up, 2006 to 2008 run-up in the mortgage crisis. They bailed everybody out for their bad behavior, except for the homeowners. Many of look, I'll never forget when I was in the state Senate in 2003. I just been appointed, and then I was elected to the Senate. But there was a bill. Cleveland passed a very strong predatory lending bill way before the crisis became something that we talked a lot about. And the big banks in Ohio came to my office to lobby about this. They wanted a state law that preempted local governments from passing these predatory lending laws. And they came in, and I knew they were from what was then National City and Key Bank, and I said, well, I'm so glad you're here, because we're going to drive all these customers away from these predatory mortgage lenders back into your brick and mortar bank buildings where they know that you have a interest in keeping their checking account and their savings accounts, and you've been here for 100 years, and you're gonna protect them. And this predatory lending law has got to be the best thing that ever happened to you. And they're like, oh no, we're for preempting those laws. I'm like, well, and it turns out that all of those companies had subsidiaries that were out there originating those crappy loans. And then Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac did the same thing during the financial crisis. That's what we sued them in Ohio for, is creating what they called the Alt-A bank of loans. They just created their own, rather than just market and compete on being better and safer and smarter. They went out and created their own predatory loans and went out and to the great expense of their shareholders, who have never been made whole since the financial crisis, but yet they're still there.
Seems to be no accountability at all.
No,
and that's really depressing, for a country that requires accountability for our system. I have one more question I just think that we should talk about, and it's a bit more of a philosophical question about, as you point out, the Democrats and the Republicans have both had their time in being maybe not as clean, as being aligned with Wall Street, whatever it might be. It's beginning to feel to me like there's a real space in the middle of the political spectrum of America for a movement that is sensible and centrist and is neither of these extremes that we see in American politics. That's it's certainly what it's beginning to feel like there's a big middle that hasn't got leadership yet around it or hasn't been harnessed by anybody. Is it a good idea to have a centrist movement that may not be political in that sense, may not be partisan, but it's certainly pushing these ideas of accountability, of sensible consumer protection, of all these things that we think are so obvious, we expect our government to do. Is that a sensible?
Yeah, I mean, why not call it the rule of law party?
Yeah,
let's have a party that I want to vote for people that are going to keep people from cheating and reward people that work hard and play by the rules and do their and take care of their employees and don't try to find some edge all the time and take care of the environment and don't poison my water. Yet neither party represents that simple approach. I think that's the strategy for Democrats to get elected attorney general in this country and states, to be a law and order attorney general. Follow the law, fund schools properly, don't siphon the money out to private schools, stand up for ethical businesses who are trying to compete with people that are cheating. People like Donald Trump, like Donald Trump University, like all of the scammy things that he was selling that weren't what he promised to people long before he ever became a politician. Folks that are selling supplements that are not that don't do what they say they do.
Or cryptocurrency.
Yeah. Or maybe call it the truth party.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just make everybody look. Why don't we make everybody tell the truth? I mean, this is another huge problem we have in this country. There's an exception to a federal preemption of libel and slander laws when it comes to. This benefits you, Zev, because you're operating online here. So I don't want to mess with your liquidity. But at the end of the day, if a newspaper publishes a lie, they libel under state defamation laws. Mm-hmm. If that same lie is published online under Section 230 of the Federal Communications Act, those folks are immune.
Yeah, they might be immune. I don't think I'm immune, to be honest. I'm not sure.
Well, you're not personally immune, but the platform that you're presenting this on, the folks that actually have the money, the people that are profiting from these publications, and when you talk about Facebook and Twitter, or what is it called, X or Z, or they're the ones that that's where the money's going. It's not, the posters don't get anything in most cases on those sites, or they get something. It's a pittance compared to what the owners are getting, and there simply should be accountability for telling lies.
Mm-hmm. Such a good point. Those things are so simple. Rule of law, it's telling the truth. These things, so much common sense in everything you're saying. Consumer protection, just the basic things that America's built on seem to be, just ignored these days endlessly. And there is room for a party that does that, or at least a movement that builds around that. You're one of the good guys in politics that sort of got run out of politics. And you see that a lot for people who are careful prosecutors, who are good at their job, at speaking truth to power, taking powerful people to court. As you reflect back and as you look forward, do you see the same kind of people in power right now? And do you see how we can get more people like you back in power, or you in general?
Yeah, I mean, they make it really, really hard. Now, look, I take responsibility for the things I did wrong. Mm-hmm. I had an interesting conversation with somebody the other night, and really, while the extramarital affair was kind of the salacious part of the discussion when I left office, the real problem was that some people that I hired were mistreating employees in the office. And they said, the reason I would vote for you again is because when that happened, you took responsibility and resigned.
Yeah.
I mean,
that doesn't happen anymore.
When is the last time that's happened? Right. Like a Japanese executive, when their company's earnings don't come in the way that they should. The way I thought about, obviously, was horrible. I was embarrassed. It was terrible for my family, and I continue to, to apologize to them for what they went through. But at the end of the day, there's some honor in doing that, and my brand was telling the truth. Mm-hmm. And when I was in a position where if I told the truth, it was going to end my career, I didn't want to continue.
Yeah,
and based on something that wasn't true. And I think there are lots of good people who get in politics if that were true. Now with the threat and violence, it's just hard to get good, ordinary people to take that time in the state legislature or in the local city council.
That's exactly where we need them. We need people like you in the state legislatures. We need people like you in state office and in federal office, but also in the city council. It's going to be those institutions that I think might be the final line of defense as we try to defend this democracy going forward. Marc Dann, I hope you do return to public office, although I'm sure you have a thriving law firm. Do you want to tell people about how they can get in touch with you or where they can find you online? And
sure. Yeah, we're at danlaw.com is our firm, and we do work all over the country representing consumers against financial predators, and so we're happy, particularly when it comes to mortgage related issues. We're happy to talk to anybody, and we try to help. If we can't help you, we'll try to find somebody that can on a state by state basis.
Marc Dann, one of the genuinely good guys in politics and now in law. Thank you very much for being here on Narrative tonight. I really appreciate your time. I think we'll be in touch with you on some other things that we're developing, but I really appreciate you and the work you've been doing as a private lawyer, but also in your public office. Thank you for doing everything you've done, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Zev. I appreciate the opportunity.
And that's it for Narrative Live tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at the 5 Stack at 3 o'clock with Dean Blundell. We'll see you then. Bye-bye, everybody.